should the average user buy the cheapest M2 Mac Mini? There are so many videos that talk about the M2 Mac Mini from the perspective of a video editor, a photographer, or a creator, and that makes sense because this is such a capable computer. But I want to look at whether this Mac Mini is a good value for the average user. And because there are more configuration options, let's talk about what the Mac Mini is, what you get when you buy it, which configuration you should get, and then what else you need. The Mac Mini is a super small desktop, and when you first take it out of the box, you're like, wait, that's it? At the same time, this small form factor makes it a great option for someone who doesn't need, or maybe just doesn't want, a big old computer tower. It's also the cheapest current Mac, and it actually starts out at $100 less than the M1 Mac Mini was when it was released. But even with the smaller form factor, we're getting upgraded ports, Wi-Fi 6E compatibility for even faster wireless networking, Bluetooth 5.3, and then an extremely powerful and efficient M2 chip. And by the way, speaking of unboxing, when you buy a Mac Mini, you get the Mac Mini itself, you get a power cord, some paperwork, and then an Apple sticker. That's it. There's no keyboard and there's no mouse or trackpad. Now for me, that's great because I don't like paying for accessories that I don't plan on using. For example, the M1 iMac comes with a Magic Keyboard and a Magic Mouse. Now, visually, I love the fact that the accessories match the iMac, but practically speaking, the Magic Keyboard is not my favorite keyboard to type on, and the Magic Mouse is, well, the Magic Mouse. On a side note, the Magic Trackpad is awesome, and if you like using a trackpad, I highly recommend getting one. Now, the design of the Mac Mini is super clean and streamlined. We're getting a milled aluminum body with a nice satin finish, and there are no ports on the front, which is both good and bad. On the one hand, all you see on the front is the LED indicator light, and all your cables and dongles are on the back, so your setup looks great. On the other hand, it means that if you're using something like an external SSD that you share between devices, you have to reach to the back every time you want to connect it. Now, this is more likely to matter to a more demanding user because most average users don't plug and unplug accessories on a regular basis. And also, I was hoping that with the M2 Pro Mac Mini, Apple would use the same front port setup that they used with the Mac Studio. And I talk more about that in my initial review. I'm also going to tell you more about a hub that I recommend later on in the video. In terms of ports on the back, with the regular M2 Mac Mini, you get 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, 2 USB-A ports, an HDMI port, a 3.5mm headphone jack, and a gigabit Ethernet port, which you can upgrade to 10 gigabit. And by the way, the much more expensive M2 Pro model gives you 4 Thunderbolt ports on the back. Now, in terms of setup, everything is extremely simple. And if this is your first Mac, just follow the instructions on the screen and you'll be ready to go in a couple of minutes. If you're migrating from another Mac and you're porting over files and apps, then it'll take a little bit longer and it will depend on your transfer speed. I'll talk more about wireless accessories later on, but I did need to use a wired keyboard and mouse for the initial setup. Now this year, there are more choices to make when you get your Mac Mini because there are actually 2 versions of the chip. We've got the regular M2 and then the M2 Pro. Now for most users, the M2 is definitely the way to go, but I'll talk a little bit more about the differences in the performance section in case you're not sure which way you want to go. So the base M2 Mac Mini, the one that you can get for $599, comes with 256 gigabytes of internal storage and 8 gigabytes of unified memory. And this is where things get a little tricky. So none of the M2 Mac Minis are upgradable. So whatever configuration you're choosing now is what you're gonna have forever. The M2 chip can be upgraded to 2 terabytes of storage. And if you end up needing more than that, the M2 Pro can go all the way up to 8 terabytes. But you also have the option of using an external SSD. And you can buy external SSDs for a lot less than it would cost to upgrade the internal storage. Like you can get a 2 terabyte SSD for less than it would cost just to add 256 gigabytes through Apple. Now, you may have heard that the 256 gigabyte M2 chip comes with a slower SSD than the M1 chip, and that's true. When I compared the 2 base models, there was a difference, especially when we look at write speeds. And if you care about why, it's because Apple only used a single NAND chip on the 256 gigabyte model versus 2 on all the other M2 models, and then of course all the M1 machines. But the real question that you should ask is this going to matter to you? And my answer is no, at least not for someone who's going to buy the absolute cheapest M2 Mac Mini. I tested both setups and I didn't notice a meaningful difference for basic use. Startup time was super fast. I always have a bunch of tabs open in my browser. I use messages, notes, photos, and both models were very fast. Now, is there a difference? Of course, and if you're going to be doing more demanding things like photo and video editing, you should consider getting at least 512 gigabytes. You might also want to upgrade if you're using bigger apps or games that take up a lot of storage, or if you store photos and video files locally on your machine. And that brings me to unified memory, which is similar, but at the same time different than traditional RAM. So imagine super fast and efficient memory that allows apps to quickly share data between the CPU, GPU, and neural engine. And Apple says that you could do more with that than you could with the same amount of traditional RAM. And while that's true, it's not magic. Like, there's no pixie dust here. So even though 8 gigabytes works just fine for basic tasks and even for running multiple apps, if you're planning on performing more demanding tasks in the future, I would highly recommend that you upgrade to 16 gigabytes. You'll never regret having too much unified memory, and you'll be able to run more apps and get higher performance. And speaking of performance, I'm only going to give you a very high level overview because the average user doesn't need to sit there and look at a ton of benchmark tests. The M2 chip comes with an 8-core CPU with 4 high-performance cores which are designed to handle process-intensive tasks, and then 4 high-efficiency cores that handle less demanding tasks and at the same time preserve power. And one of the advantages of the M2 Pro is that you can configure it with 6 or 8 performance cores, so you can get even more out of this Mac Mini. Now, for the typical user, the regular M2 is already more powerful than what they're likely to need, and it should still have plenty of processing power for the next 5 to 7 years. So again, this is why I recommend that you upgrade the unified memory so you don't run into a situation where your Mac Mini has plenty of processing power, but you need to replace it because you don't have enough unified memory. Now, one of the things that I love about the M2 Mac Mini, I also really liked it about the M1 version, is how quiet they are. So even though there's a good sized fan to help keep everything cool, I couldn't hear anything even when I ran Final Cut Pro with multiple 4K 60 video streams. I actually have an M1 Mac Mini that's running the audio components for this video setup. It's right here, right out of the frame, and the microphone doesn't pick up anything. Now I want to talk about some accessories that you'll need if you end up buying a Mac Mini. I'm also working on a full accessories video where I'll give you all my recommendations. So for a keyboard, right now I'm using the Keychron K12, which is a super sleek and compact mechanical keyboard, and I just love the sound of typing on a mechanical keyboard. I love that. Like, literally, I could fall asleep listening to someone type. For a mouse, I'm using the Logitech MX Master 3 for Mac. I've been using this line of mice from Logitech for 13 years now. This mouse is extremely comfortable, and I can pair it with up to 3 devices and then switch between them by pressing the button on the bottom. If you want a hub to add additional ports in the front, Satin makes a great option. There's even one with a slot for an SSD drive. As far as monitor, I'm using the Apple Studio display because this is the same setup that I use with my Mac Studio. It's definitely not cheap, and it's not really a monitor that I recommend to the average user, but the display itself is absolutely amazing. I also really like how it looks, and don't worry, in my accessories video, I'll have much more affordable options. So yes or no, should the average user buy the M2 Mac Mini? If you need a very powerful and compact desktop, or you want to dip your toe into the Apple ecosystem, you just can't beat the price to performance ratio at $599. I would still recommend that you consider upgrading to 16 gigabytes of unified memory and make sure that you have enough internal storage, just because this is a computer that you should be able to use for a bunch of years. Now, of course, if you're looking for a dedicated gaming desktop, this is not what you're looking for. And if you love the form factor, but you want additional processing power, better GPU performance, double the memory bandwidth, more ports, and better external display support, then you should check out the M2 Pro Mac Mini. Now you should watch this comparison, click on my face to subscribe. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.